Hello and welcome to Live at PALS, to another screencast or lesson on AS level biology. We are in lesson 3, completing the paper 2 AS level structured questions for biology, the May-June 2020 paper 21 or 2-1. In the first two lessons we have completed question 1, 2 and 3, and today we will have a look at question 4. Question 4 is all about blood and gas exchange and the involved organ systems, the respiratory system and the cardiovascular system. Okay, let's get started. Question 4. Figure 4.1 shows the site of gas exchange in the mammalian lung. X and Y and W, we eventually have to name. We see a couple of red blood cells, some elastic fibers. And the first question is, state 2 ways in which carbon dioxide is transported in the blood. There are in total 3 major ways in which carbon dioxide is transported in the blood, and the first method that carries most of the carbon dioxide, I think around 70%, is in the form of hydrogen carbonate ions or carbonic acid, the ions of the carbonic acid, hydrogen carbonate ions, or bicarbonate ions. So we have first method is hydrogen carbonate ions, which are HCO3 minus ions. HCO, does that work? Let's see, 3. Change the color. Okay. HCO. Minus. And the second form in which carbon dioxide is transported in the blood, which is around 20 to 25%, is in the form of carbaminohemoglobin. Very long word. So what is carbaminohemoglobin? Carbaminohemoglobin is just CO2 bonded to hemoglobin in red blood cells. This is quite important, this carbaminohemoglobin, because when carbon dioxide binds to the hemoglobin, this will reduce the affinity of hemoglobin for oxygen allowing more oxygen to be released by the hemoglobin. And that means that where carbon dioxide concentrations are high, usually in respiring tissues where oxygen is needed, this is where the affinity of hemoglobin for oxygen is low, meaning hemoglobin will release more oxygen. So it's not only about transporting the CO2, it's as well about reducing the affinity of oxygen to release the oxygen from the hemoglobin. And the third way in which carbon dioxide is transported in the blood is in its dissolved form, dissolved carbon dioxide. But this only accounts for a few percent of the total amount of carbon dioxide transported in the blood. Again, around 70% is dissolved in the form of the hydrogen carbonate ions of the carbonic acid, and these hydrogen carbonate ions are produced by an enzyme that reacts carbon dioxide with water to form or to speed up the reaction to form hydrogen carbonate ions. This is the carboanhydrase ion. Okay, let's have a look at B. So let's quickly list the three methods again. We said hydrogen carbonate ions. This makes about 70% HCO3 minus. Then we have the one up here, which is carbanoglobin, about 23%, I think. And then we have carbon dioxide dissolved in blood plasma, which is about 7%, I guess, to add it up to the 100. Okay, question 4b. Table 4.1 shows the partial pressures of oxygen, PO2, and carbon dioxide, PbCO2, at locations W, X, and Y. Here we see the partial pressure in kilopascal and the three locations W, X, and Y. You can see at location W, the partial pressure of oxygen is quite high with 13.87 and carbon dioxide 5.33. In the tissue X, carbon dioxide is 6.0 and oxygen 5.3. And we can see that at location Y, which is here, oxygen is 13.83 and carbon dioxide 5.55. We can see as well that W represents the air in the alveoli, and X and Y is the blood. And before it passes the blood in a capillary, before it passes along the lining of the alveoli, and Y is after it has passed by the alveolus. Okay, let's have a look at the question. With reference to figure 4.1 and table 4.1, describe the exchanges that occur as blood flows from X to Y. All right, so let's approach this question. So as we already said, what we mentioned, we can actually write down. We can see here this is on position X is the blood before gas exchange, position Y is the blood after gas exchange. So we can say that oxygen and oxygen diffuses from the air, the alveolus, into the blood. While the blood passes from X to Y. Oxygen diffuses from high partial pressure of oxygen, high PO2, to low PO2, W to X. Now we can actually state a couple of values here. We can add that in. High PO2, high PO2 at W with 13.87 kilopascal to low partial pressure of oxygen at X with 5.33 K PA till the partial pressure is in equilibrium at Y with 13.83. CO2 diffuses in the opposite direction from blood at X to W. We can state values here now as well. we can specify the diffusion a bit more. The diffusion has to occur across two layers of cells, which is the alveolar wall or this alveolar wall is as well called the squamous epithelium. And across the second layer of cells, which is the capillary wall, which is an endothelium. So the gases diffuse from high to low partial pressure, from W to X in case of oxygen, until pressure is in equilibrium at Y. The opposite is true for carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide diffuses from X to Y, from high to low partial pressure, from X to W, until in equilibrium at Y. And the diffusion occurs across two layers of cells, the squamous epithelium, the lining of the alveolus, and the capillary wall, or the endothelium. That should be enough for this question. Elastic fibers are present in tissues at the site of gas exchange in the lungs. Describe the roles of elastic fibers in the gas exchange system and in the cardiovascular system. So we have elastic fibers, as it says here, at the site of gas exchange, which means in the alveolar wall, as we can see in the figure here. A couple of elastic fibers that stretch around embedded in the alveolar wall, and as well in the capillaries around the alveolus. So what is the function of these, and as well related to the cardiovascular system? So during breathing, when we breathe in, when we inspire, air streams into our lungs, and that causes the alveoli, or the alveolar wall, to stretch. So during inspiration, the alveolar walls are stretched, and they expand. So this is related to the elastic fibers in the gas exchange system. In arteries, the blood vessels that contain most elastic fibers, and as well arterioles. So arteries and arterioles expand as the blood pressure increases during a pulse. Our heart beats, produces a pressure wave. We can feel this pressure wave by feeling our pulse, which is an artery that expands due to this surge in pressure. So why are the elastic fibers now important? In both cases, the elastic fibers prevent rupture of the blood vessels and the alveoli, and allow alveoli and blood vessels or arteries and arterioles to recoil. After the pressure surge, or after the surge in pressure, to retain to their original shape. That should be enough for this answer. So what points do we have? During inspiration, alveoli expand, arteries expand due to blood pressure, especially during pulse. Elastic fibers prevent rupture, third point, and allow the alveoli and blood vessels to recoil. That should be the fourth point. We can actually maybe specify what or how these two things help the alveoli and the arteries. So for the alveoli, the recoil allows the air, or this forces out the air. And in the arteries, the elasticity maintains a high blood pressure. Our arteries and arterioles, they play a very important role in maintaining the blood pressure. It is much more effective to have elastic blood vessels than unelastic, rigid ones. If we think of blood vessels, there's rigid tubes, the blood pressure would decrease fairly quickly, but being elastic, the blood vessels are able to maintain a high blood pressure. Okay, part D of the question, we have a graph here. Scientists in Peru investigated the effect of moving from sea level to high altitude on the composition of blood. Scientists studied 10 students. Each student had lived at sea level since birth and then moved to live in the Andes at heights of 4,500 meters above sea level. The scientists took samples of blood from each student before they moved to live at the high altitude. The scientists took further blood samples at intervals after the students had moved to high altitude. The relative proportions of red blood cells and plasma in each sample were determined. The total volume of blood for each student was determined at each sampling time. As the students were all of different body mass, the total volumes were converted to volume per kilogram of body mass. And figure 2.1 shows for each sampling time and the mean volume of blood per kilogram of body mass and the proportions of red blood cells and plasma. In centimeter cube per kilogram, the mean volume of blood per kilogram of body mass, and plasma and red blood cells in proportions. And the y-axis, the time in month after moving to high altitude. Okay, let's have a look at the question. The percentage of mean blood volume that is represented by red blood cells for the samples taken at sea level is 48%. Calculate the percentage of mean blood volume that is represented by red blood cells at 5 to 6 months after living at high altitude. Show your working and give your answer to the nearest whole number. That shouldn't be too difficult. You have to look at the total volume of blood per kilogram body mass and then the volume of red blood cells. Find the percentage. So let's have a look at the graph. 5 to 6 months, this is what we're looking at here. Yep, 5 to 6 months. And we have to check the total volume of blood that is right here. We have steps of 2, 82, 84, 86. We have, 86. 86 total vol per kilogram of body mass, 86 centimeter cube per kilogram, and red blood cells are at 50 centimeter cube per kilogram. We have to find percent, which is part over whole, 50 over 86, and times that by 100. And let me use my calculator quickly. That is 58%. describe and explain the results. Okay, that one's a bit tougher. So let's first describe the results. We can see that we have a general trend, which is an increase in blood volume per kilogram body mass. We can actually state some numbers here from 78 centimeter cube per kilogram at the start, time 0 at sea level, to up here, was that 94 centimeter cube per kilogram body mass after 12 months. We could be a bit more detailed here. What we can see is that before it starts increasing, we have a little dip in our data. This is going down. We could mention that, but I think it's alright to just mention the general trend that we have a general increase in the blood volume. What else can we say? That the increase in blood volume, it looks like it's mainly due to an increase in red blood cells. If we look at the blood plasma, we can check here. We have 78, we said that already, and 38. That is a total volume of 40 centimeter cube. And up here we have, what did we say, 94, and this is 55. -94 minus 55 is 39. So we can see in the volume, or the volume of blood plasma didn't change a lot. What do we have here? Yeah, still around 40, 41 maybe. So it looks like plasma doesn't change a lot, no? So this is another point, no? This increase is caused by a general increase in red blood cell volume, where the blood plasma volume stays Same with some minor fluctuations. Now again, we could quickly state the changes here. Again, for blood plasma, at T0 that was 40, for plasma that was 40 centimeter cube per kilogram of body mass, and at time 12 months it's 39. And for red blood cells, it goes from 38 at T0 up to 55. This is not the highest value. We could as well state the highest value, which seems to be 57 at time 7 to 8. Highest RBC. I think that is enough description. We could as well, maybe add what we did in the question before, where we calculated the percentage, which was 58%. We could do that same calculation for the data at sea level and after 12 months or 7 to 8 months to support our statement that we made here with the actual percentages. So I'm not going to do that now, that takes a bit too long, but percentages of red blood cells of total blood volume, which mainly increases as we already said. Okay, what is our explanation for this change? It's a bit more interesting. So obviously our main problem here is the change in altitude, and something that you should know is with increasing altitude, the partial pressure of O2 decreases in the atmosphere. That means that less O2 is inhaled and absorbed into the blood. And the red blood cells, obviously. Hemoglobin. And that leads to, over time, the body adapts to the change, produces more red blood cells, which means more hemoglobin, which allows more O2 can be absorbed and taken into the blood. And yeah, that should be it for the explanation. Again, important here is that we have more red blood cells that cause the increase in volume of the blood, not more blood plasma. That's quite important. If both would increase at the same rate, that means that probably the same amount of red blood cells would pass the alveoli per unit time. So we really need a percentage increase of red blood cells, which will basically cause more red blood cells pass by the alveoli per unit time. That's quite important. All right, that is question 4 completed in detail. I hope you learned a little bit more about the blood, how carbon dioxide is transported in the blood, and adaptations of our body in different altitudes due to different partial pressures of oxygen in the atmosphere. I hope I could teach you a bit more on how to read and interpret, describe and explain graphs. Again, we have 2 questions here explicitly where we can again pick up 3 points by just stating some important values. Again, whenever you have a graph or table, make use of this, state values, changes that are important and relate to your answer, and that usually scores you a free point. So never forget about quoting the important values. All right, next time we'll go over question 5. Yeah, I think 5 only, and 5 and 6 will finish the paper in the next screencast. So we have one more screencast for question 5 and 6. All right, see you next time.